There was an old, decrepit house that sat on the edge of a small town, abandoned for decades. Rumor had it that no one ever stayed there for long. Whenever someone bought the property, they left mysteriously or disappeared altogether. The locals knew it as the House of Shadows, but no one could explain what truly happened inside. They only knew that after nightfall, something moved within the walls. One autumn evening, a young couple, Sarah and Mark, bought the house, lured by its low price and hoping to restore it. The townspeople warned them to stay away, but they shrugged it off as superstition. The first few days went by uneventfully, and they began renovations. The house was old, but beautiful, with intricate woodwork and high, vaulted ceilings. On the fourth night, Sarah awoke to the sound of faint scratching coming from within the walls. She nudged Mark awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Mark listened, but the sound had stopped. He assumed it was just mice or rats. "It's an old house, babe. I'll set some traps tomorrow." The next day, Mark set traps, but they remained untouched. That night, the scratching returned, louder this time, almost as if someone, or something, was clawing to get out. Sarah tried to convince herself it was just an animal, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister at play. The shadows cast by the flickering fireplace seemed to move unnaturally across the walls, stretching and twisting. The following night, Mark noticed it too. The scratching was accompanied by soft whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They both froze in their bed, listening. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, as if they were alive. Terrified, they tried to leave the house the next morning, but the front door wouldn't open. The windows were stuck. Mark tried prying them open, but they wouldn't budge, as though the house had trapped them inside. The air grew thick and heavy, and the temperature dropped. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't escape. As night fell, the house grew darker, and the walls began to creak and groan. The scratching returned, but now it was more frantic, more desperate. The whispers became clearer, but they spoke in a language Sarah and Mark couldn't understand. The shadows that had danced across the walls before now took on distinct forms, human-like figures, but twisted and deformed. One of the shadows, larger than the rest, seemed to crawl out of the wall itself, its body impossibly thin, with elongated limbs and hollow, glowing eyes. It moved toward them with unnatural speed, whispering in that same unknown language. Mark grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the basement, hoping to find another way out. In the basement, they discovered something horrifying, a small, locked room that hadn't appeared on the house's blueprints. Mark kicked the door open, revealing an old wooden chair with heavy chains attached to it. The walls were covered in deep scratches, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. As they stood frozen in terror, the door slammed shut behind them. The basement grew darker, and the shadows began to close in. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The largest shadow emerged again, this time with a twisted grin on its face. It reached out toward them. The last thing Sarah remembered before everything went black was the sensation of something cold wrapping around her, dragging her down into the darkness. When the townspeople noticed the couple had vanished, the house was once again abandoned. No one dared go inside. They simply added Sarah and Mark to the growing list of people swallowed by the House of Shadows, leaving the house to wait for its next victims.